Welcome to Warriors of the World. Today, we dive into the story of a king who spent more time on the battlefield than ruling his kingdom. A ruler who defied his father, clashed with his own family, and carved his name into history with blood and steel, Richard the Lionheart. But was he truly a noble hero, or a ruthless conqueror? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring incredible stories about the world's greatest warriors. Hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey through time. Richard was born on September 8, 1157, in Oxford, England. Son of King Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, his destiny was marked by power and war. His mother, one of the most influential women of the Middle Ages, ensured he received both a refined education and rigorous military training. Although born in England, Richard considered himself more French than English. He spent most of his childhood in Aquitaine, where he learned about politics, poetry, and, most importantly, war. Even as a child, he displayed fierce bravery and boundless ambition. He wasn't just a prince, he was a leader in the making. His father, Henry II, ruled over a vast empire, but his relationship with his sons was complicated. Richard grew up in a world where betrayal and power struggles were a part of everyday life. Soon, he would learn that in his family, blood ties did not guarantee loyalty. By the age of 16, Richard was already commanding armies, crushing rebellions in Aquitaine. But his greatest enemy wasn't in distant lands. His true battle would be against his own father. Henry II's kingdom was plagued by tension. His sons, eager for power, saw their father as an obstacle. In 1173, Richard joined his brothers, Henry the Young King and Geoffrey of Brittany, in a rebellion against their father. But this uprising wasn't their idea. It was orchestrated by their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who also opposed Henry II. The rebellion erupted across the French territories of the empire. At just 15 years old, Richard proved himself a natural leader, commanding troops with a ferocity that even surprised his allies. But his father's experience was unmatched. Henry II crushed the rebellion with brutal efficiency. The consequences were severe. Eleanor of Aquitaine was captured and imprisoned for years. Henry the Young King and Geoffrey were forgiven, while Richard, though spared punishment, was forced to swear loyalty to his father. Yet, the tension between them never faded. Richard quickly regained his influence in Aquitaine. He crushed uprisings from rebellious nobles and ruled with an iron fist. With each victory, his reputation grew, earning the respect of his soldiers and the fear of his enemies. His fearless nature in battle earned him the legendary title, Lionheart. Despite the temporary peace, Richard never forgot his defeat in the rebellion. He knew his time would come. When his father's health began to decline, he realized the moment had arrived to seize the throne by force. In 1189, following the death of his older brother, Richard became the rightful heir. That same year, a weakened and defeated Henry II was forced to acknowledge Richard as his successor. But the new king had no intention of ruling England. His true ambition lay on the battlefields of the Third Crusade. With his father dead and the crown of England now his, Richard I was officially crowned king on September 3, 1189. However, his heart was never in London, nor in the affairs of governance. For years, his true desire had been to join the Third Crusade, a holy war to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. To Richard, the throne was merely a tool to finance his real passion, war. But before setting off, he had to secure his kingdom. To the shock of many, he spent only 6 months in England before leaving it in the hands of trusted ministers. He even remarked that, if he could, he would sell London if he found a buyer. England was nothing more than a possession to him. His true home was in his French territories like Aquitaine and Normandy. In 1190, Richard assembled a formidable army. Alongside Philip II of France, his ally-turned-rival, he set sail for the Holy Land. But the journey was anything but smooth. Along the way, he stopped in Sicily to resolve a dispute over the island's throne. There, tensions with Philip II flared, further straining their fragile alliance. However, the real trouble came in Cyprus. A storm scattered Richard's fleet, and several of his ships wrecked on the island. The local ruler, Isaac Comnenus, took the survivors captive. Big mistake. Enraged, Richard invaded Cyprus, crushed Isaac's forces, and took control of the island within days. This bold move secured a crucial base for the Crusaders and provided extra funding for his campaign. Finally, in June 1191, Richard reached his true destination, the Holy Land. Little did he know that he was about to face one of history's greatest military minds, Saladin. When Richard arrived in the Holy Land, he found a dire situation. The city of Acre, one of the most vital strongholds in the region, had been under siege by the Crusaders for nearly 2 years. Yet, despite their efforts, the Muslim defenders, reinforced by Saladin, had withstood every assault. Richard's arrival would change everything. From the very beginning, he proved he had no intention of failing. Unlike other Crusader kings, Richard did not command from the rear. He fought on the front lines, personally leading attacks on the city walls. His presence reinvigorated the Crusaders, who pushed harder than ever. During the siege, Richard fell dangerously ill. Historians believe he contracted scurvy or typhoid fever, leaving him weak and feverish. Yet, even from his sickbed, he continued directing the battle, refusing to let his army lose momentum. His sheer determination kept morale high. Finally, on July 12, 1191, after weeks of relentless combat, Acre fell to the Crusaders. It was a decisive victory, but Richard was not satisfied. He demanded that Saladin pay a hefty ransom for the captured Muslim prisoners. When the payment was delayed, Richard made a ruthless decision. He ordered the execution of nearly 3,000 prisoners in full view of Saladin's forces. This act sent a clear message: Richard had no mercy in war. But it also did something else. It turned his rivalry with Saladin into something deeply personal. From this point on, the two leaders would engage in a dangerous battle of strategy, with the fate of Jerusalem hanging in the balance. After the fall of Acre, the war between Richard the Lionheart and Saladin reached its peak. The two leaders were vastly different. Saladin was a patient strategist, a master of defensive warfare. Richard, on the other hand, was an unstoppable force, always leading his troops from the front. What followed was a clash of titans, with each trying to outmaneuver the other in a game of strength and strategy. With his forces reinforced, Richard marched south, aiming to capture Jaffa before pushing toward Jerusalem. But Saladin wasn't going to let him advance without resistance. As the Crusaders moved forward, Muslim forces constantly harassed them, launching ambushes and using hit-and-run tactics to wear them down. Yet Richard was no fool. He adapted quickly. Instead of allowing his army to be scattered, he kept them in a tight, disciplined formation, punishing any attackers with devastating cavalry charges. On September 7, 1191, near Arsuf, Saladin made the bold decision to meet Richard in open battle. 4 hours, his horse archers rained arrows on the Crusaders, attacking and retreating in a relentless cycle. Richard held his forces steady, waiting for the perfect moment. When the enemy finally overcommit, he gave the order. The Templars and Hospitallers launched a thunderous charge, breaking through the Muslim lines and forcing Saladin into retreat. Despite the victory, Richard knew the war was far from over. Jerusalem, the ultimate prize, still remained in Saladin's hands. But before he could march on the Holy City, he needed to ensure his army could endure the challenge ahead. With Jaffa secured, Richard turned his eyes toward his final goal, the conquest of Jerusalem. But he faced a critical dilemma. Even if he captured the city, could he actually hold it? Saladin, despite his losses, was still a formidable force. Without reinforcements from Europe, Richard knew his army wouldn't survive a prolonged siege. The winter of 1191 to 1192 was brutal for both sides. The Crusaders, unused to the desert cold, suffered under harsh conditions, while Saladin's forces struggled to keep Jerusalem supplied under constant Christian raids. The stakes were higher than ever, and both leaders knew that one wrong move could spell disaster. By the spring of 1192, Richard was within reach of Jerusalem. But after months of planning and skirmishing, he made a shocking decision. He withdrew. It was an unthinkable move for a warrior like him, but Richard understood that taking the city without the ability to hold it would be a wasted sacrifice. Though the crusade failed to reclaim Jerusalem, Richard had proven himself a near-invincible commander. His victories had weakened Saladin, and soon negotiations began. Despite being fierce opponents, the two leaders respected each other. What came next would not be a battle, but a diplomatic duel between two of the greatest minds of their era. Richard the Lionheart hadn't come to the Holy Land just to leave empty-handed. If he couldn't take Jerusalem by force, he would secure the best possible deal for the Crusaders. Saladin, though still strong, knew that Richard was an adversary who could keep pressuring him for years. Though they were enemies, they shared a rare quality in the medieval world: mutual respect. The negotiations were long and tense. Richard demanded that Christian pilgrims be allowed to visit the holy sites without fear, and that the coastal cities, critical for maintaining the Crusader presence, remain in Christian hands. Saladin, however, wanted to prevent the Crusaders from regaining strength in the region. Finally, in September 1192, both leaders reached an agreement. Christians would be allowed safe passage to Jerusalem without restrictions or harassment. Additionally, Jaffa and other key coastal cities would stay under Crusader control, ensuring their foothold in the region. The treaty was not a complete victory, but it was the best outcome Richard could achieve. Both men knew that this was merely a truce, not the end of the conflict. The struggle for the Holy Land would continue, but neither Richard nor Saladin would live to see it. Richard had proven himself unbeatable in battle, but his greatest challenge awaited him on his journey home. During his absence, his brother John Lackland and Philip II of France had been plotting to seize the English throne. Richard knew he needed to return quickly, but fate had other plans. In the winter of 1192, while traveling through Europe in disguise to avoid his enemies, Richard was captured near Vienna by Leopold V of Austria, a noble who harbored deep resentment against him. He accused Richard of humiliating the Austrians at Acre, where Richard had ordered the Austrian flag removed from the city's walls after its conquest. Leopold handed Richard over to Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, who saw an opportunity to both enrich himself and weaken England. He demanded an astronomical ransom for Richard's release, 150,000 silver marks, nearly 3 years' worth of England's total income. Meanwhile, in England, his brother John seized the opportunity to strengthen his claim to the throne, aligning himself with Philip II. But Richard's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, was not about to let her son's legacy crumble. She took control of the kingdom and led the effort to raise the massive ransom needed for his release. After more than a year in captivity, Richard was finally freed in February 1194. His return was celebrated by his loyal supporters, but his long absence had left scars on his kingdom. Now, he had one mission left: to reclaim his throne and punish those who had betrayed him. When Richard the Lionheart returned to England in 1194, he found his kingdom in turmoil. His brother, John Lackland, had attempted to seize the throne with the backing of Philip II of France, and many castles had fallen into enemy hands. But Richard's arrival changed everything. Knowing he was no match for his brother, John quickly begged for forgiveness. In a surprising move, Richard spared him, seeing John as a mere nuisance compared to his true enemy, Philip II. Richard spent only a few weeks in England. He secured funds, re-established his authority, and left the kingdom in the hands of trusted officials. Then, he sailed for France, determined to reclaim the lands he had lost. For the next 5 years, he was consumed by war, fighting to restore control over Normandy, Anjou, and Aquitaine. On the battlefield, Richard remained the same relentless leader. His campaigns were brutal and strategic, gradually forcing Philip II's forces to retreat. By 1198, he achieved a decisive victory, pushing the French king back. For the first time in years, England's territories were secure. But Richard was never one to rest. Always seeking more power, he set his sights on smaller fortresses to further strengthen his position. It was during one of these sieges, at the castle of Caylus, that fate finally caught up with him. On March 25, 1199, while inspecting the castle walls of Caylus, Richard was struck by an arrow in the shoulder. Initially, the wound seemed minor, but poor medical treatment led to a deadly infection. For days, the king endured excruciating pain with the same courage he had shown in battle. Knowing his time was short, Richard did something unexpected. He pardoned the archer who had shot him. Accepting his fate, he called for his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who remained by his side in his final moments. On April 6, 1199, at the age of 41, Richard the Lionheart passed away. His body was laid to rest at Fontevraud Abbey, alongside his father, Henry II. But his heart, literally, was buried in Rouen, Normandy, as a tribute to his deep connection to his French lands. Richard's death marked the end of an era. Without his strong leadership, the Angevin Empire soon crumbled. His brother, John Lackland, took the throne, but his reign was disastrous, losing most of the French territories Richard had fought so hard to protect. Over the centuries, Richard the Lionheart became a legendary symbol of bravery. His story was romanticized in songs and literature, and he remains a timeless figure in popular culture, appearing in movies, books, and video games. But his legacy raises an interesting question. Was he truly a great king? He spent less than 6 months in England and prioritized war over ruling. His people admired him, but would England have been stronger if he had been more present? Thank you for joining us on Warriors of the World. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and become a channel member to support our project. Leave your thoughts in the comments and share this video with fellow history lovers. See you in the next battle.